Well, the political season continues. The dust has settled, I guess, from the New Hampshire primary. Hey, I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahoman's video studio. Happy to be joined by Oklahoma State Senator David Holt. Sir, thanks for your time this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Last night we saw the results of the New Hampshire primary on the heels of Saturday night's debate. I want to get into that a little bit. I should also say that Senator Holt here is the Oklahoma chairman for U.S. Senator Marco Rubio's presidential campaign here in Oklahoma. Talk about that. Talk about a little bit of the Oklahoma economy as the state legislature got started last week. But first of all, Saturday night's debate led into last night. You actually spent the past couple days in New Hampshire. What did you see?
Yeah, so I'm the state chair for Rubio. I wanted to help him in any way I could. It's important who our president is going to be. It's important to Oklahomans. It's important to my friends and neighbors. And I really want a Republican to win. And I really feel strongly, and I feel this objectively, that the only Republican that can win next November is Marco Rubio. So I wanted to be out there to help. And so I went out late Sunday night. I got back, left early this morning. As we sit here, it's Wednesday. And so I spent Monday and Tuesday there. And it was a great experience. I mean, I see why people romanticize the New Hampshire primary. There's fewer people in New Hampshire than there are in Oklahoma City. And it's about the same size, or at least it feels that way. You know, it seems like you can drive from one end to the next in an hour. On Monday, I went with Senator Rubio and went alongside him with all these diners that he was visiting, and kind of saw the classic New Hampshire retail politicking as he shook hands at booth to booth. And then, of course, we had Tuesday and the election day, and then the election watch party, which, I think, as we all know, didn't go as well as.
What was the expectation at the watch party on Saturday's debate? That was kind of the talk of, hey, Rubio versus Christie. That didn't go in Rubio's favor. What was the watch party like last night?
Well, Saturday at 8 o'clock, the expectation on we'd be celebrating a second place and maybe even a first place showing. I mean, his momentum all week long had been incredible. And
coming out of Iowa, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the debate, he stumbled, although I would point out not in a substantive way, in kind of a superficial way. He repeated himself. And what's interesting is my experience, both with voters in New Hampshire and with voters back here in Oklahoma, is that they didn't. I don't know, people weren't as worked up about that, but man, the media made a big deal out of it. Yep. And the 2 days of just hammering on it in the media clearly had an effect. And so by the time we got to the watch party, I mean, we knew that second place was probably out of reach, although, we ultimately, there was basically 4 points between second and fifth place. But it was, it was disappointing, and that's what Senator Rubio said. But he's got a 50-state campaign. He's got a chairman in all 50 states. Is the only candidate who does. He's moved on. He's turning the page to South Carolina. He owned up, in his speech Tuesday night, and I was there watching it, and he owned up to the mistake.
How big was that? Because after the debate, he didn't really own up to it, but last night he did.
Yeah.
So I made a mistake. My fault, won't happen again.
Yeah. Well, I think it set the tone. I think it was cathartic for his supporters. I think we all. It's easy, to ride this roller coaster. I mean, because just a week ago it was, oh my goodness, Marco Rubio is going to be the next president of the United States, and then you're all down because he finishes fifth in New Hampshire. And I think we needed that. I think all his supporters needed that, and I think it set a great tone for South Carolina. And I think people who support him are, accepting now that this is going to be a long slog. It's easy to get your hopes up and think, man, we're just going to pound this out and we'll be done by March 1st and we'll be the nominee. But it's not going to be that easy. Not with this many candidates. Not with the Trump phenomenon. I mean, all of these things are going to have to be addressed, and they're going to take months. And so I think people, got their minds around that last night. And I think Senator Rubio set that tone correctly.
We were talking a little bit before we got started here. There wasn't much difference percentage-wise between second and fifth, certainly not third and fifth, but apparently a big difference between fifth, sixth, and seventh. Today, we saw Governor Christie and Carly Fiorina suspend their campaigns.
Yeah, well, Carly Fiorina is a great candidate and has been a great addition to the field, but she just never caught on, when voting started. And then in Governor Christie's case, he was running a one-state campaign. He spent more time in New Hampshire than anybody else. He didn't really have the resources to go beyond this if it didn't lead to some momentum, and it did not lead to any momentum. It's kind of a shame that what he did Saturday night, was really kind of had no purpose other than to damage Senator Rubio. But nevertheless, as you say, he has dropped out, and I think it's good to move on now with basically 5 credible candidates, and I think that will help the voters kind of focus more on the contrasts between them.
So up next, the South Carolina primary. That's February 20th. The Nevada caucus is February 23rd. Your candidate, Senator Rubio, what does he do? Does he need to repackage himself? What happens next?
Well, no, I think he's just, he's here's what makes him different than the other five, and I don't think he has to repackage himself. I think he just has to keep pushing this message. I mean, I find, and a lot of people find, Donald Trump intolerable. A lot of people agree with Senator Cruz on the issues, but are beginning to understand that he's very unlikely he could win next November. I think electability is a big issue with him. And then I like Governor Bush and Governor Kasich a lot, but I just don't think I see a path, and most people don't see a path for them to win the primary. That leaves Senator Rubio as kind of the only guy that can credibly win the primary, because he's kind of everybody's, if he's not your first choice, he's kind of everybody's second choice. So he's palatable to all segments of the Republican Party. And then he can win the general, clearly. I mean, his contrast with Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders is great. It's a generational shift. And the polls back that up. I mean, whenever they do the head-to-heads of a general election matchup, he's the only Republican candidate who consistently beats Hillary and Bernie. And so that's the message I think he continues to carry. As I said, what happened Saturday night was not a substantive mistake. He didn't say the wrong thing. He didn't say suddenly that he's pro-choice or something. He didn't take a new position. He simply repeated himself. And I think at the end of the day, we all have to accept that was sort of a superficial kind of non-substantive event, and let's all move on. And I think he's, as he said, he's not going to make that mistake again, and I believe him.
Talking with State Senator David Holt, two more things. Let's take it to a more local approach here. There was an Oklahoma poll came out that Senator Rubio gaining strength in Oklahoma. Bill Shepard, the Sooner poll, he went from 10% up to 21% over the weekend, the latest poll.
Yeah, well, Oklahoma primary is, of course, March 1st, so it is just less than 3 weeks away, and so things will ramp up here fast, and I think that last week of February is going to be a lot of fun. I think you're going to see all the candidates probably passing through here. I mean, I don't know for sure on any of them yet, but I think we will.
Thought you were about to break some news
right
there.
Well, I'll hold off
Senator
on that.
Rubio right here on this desk.
That would be amazing.
It would be great.
Don't think I won't ask, but I think we're going to have a lot of excitement, and I think that poll is validating what is really the truth here. There may be 5 credible candidates left, but it's really a 3-man race, even after New Hampshire.
You're saying Trump, Cruz, and Rubio.
Yeah, and that's what the poll validates. Governor Kasich and Governor Bush have no real path, especially in the South. They were fighting for their lives their political lives in New Hampshire, and they'll be doing the very same thing in South Carolina and then in Nevada. And at any step along the way, they're very likely to be forced to accept, I think, some level of reality, and probably call it a day. But and I think we'll be left with Trump, Cruz, and Rubio, and that battle may drag on through March and April and beyond.
The Oklahoma legislative session is underway. If I gave you a fill in the blank, session is going blank so far, what would that word be? Good, bad, interesting?
Well,
a lot of work ahead of us?
Yeah, sure. Ton of work ahead of us. We're still just barely a week in. We didn't even really have any committee meetings that first week. So we haven't done anything on the floor as of yet. So it's still fairly slow moving. And, I think we're still kind of feeling out some of the best options for addressing the major budget crisis that we face. I thought the governor gave a very thoughtful, thought-provoking State of the State last week with a lot of very solid ideas. Not just about how to make our state a better place in terms of corrections reform, but also how to deal specifically with the budget. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things on the table. I've also been very vocal on the need for teacher pay raises, at least whether we can get them done this year or we can at least put the building blocks in place so that there's some certainty to that issue in following years. One of those two things needs to happen, so that's another major issue. But all of that's still pretty embryonic. We're just getting started, and we've got 4 more months to go.
Well, I'll ask one final question. Sure. Your comments on this today. Our Oklahoman's Rick Green was there. Governor Mary Fallin today urged lawmakers to tread lightly as they consider altering economic development incentives, perhaps saying, hey, if you swing too far in one direction, that may have an effect there as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so basically where that's coming from is the idea that we've only got so many buckets we can address this budget crisis with. We've got, you got tax increases, or you got budget cuts, or you've got dealing with some of these what I would call tax reimbursements, and deductions and credits. I think the point she's making is well made in the sense that sometimes you're giving X to a company to incentivize them to do business in Oklahoma, and they're essentially putting 2X back into your tax base. And so if you want to save X and you take away that incentive and you lose 2X because they go away, and they don't do business here, well, that didn't help your bottom line after all. It may have felt good in the short term, but in the long term, you've got less tax revenue than you did before. And so I think, it's probably right. Tread lightly. Be very intentional and conscientious about that, because you don't want to cost yourself revenue. That's not the point. The point is you're trying to find sources of revenue to fill this $900 million budget hole. And if you employ the repeal of a tax credit as one of your methods, you better be sure that tax credit's not actually going to come back to bite you 2 times. And that's certainly the case with some of these. A lot of these tax credits do create jobs that pay good salaries that end up helping our income tax and all of that. And so we'd be foolish to cut off our nose to spite our face. So I think that's right. We got to be very, very careful. Having said that, I think there are some things we can look at in tax reform. And they don't necessarily have to be tax credits. We have a very unique double deduction for state and local taxes that costs the state $80 million a year. Nobody even knows about it or appreciates it. That's something I think we can look at. There's lots of things out there along with tax credits. So, and the governor gave a state of the state that included a budget plan that did not repeal any tax credits. So she proved you can do this without repealing tax credits. And so I think that's something we have to look at.
He's Oklahoma Senator David Holt. Sir, I know you've been traveling a lot this week and you have a busy schedule. We appreciate you stopping by.
It's my pleasure. I'll come here anytime.
All right, fantastic. More coverage, political coverage from the state capitol and from Washington can be found in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com.